The fence line shouldn't have been broken. Ben Garrett knew every post on his 160 acres the way a man knows the scars on his own hands. 3 days prior, the northern boundary had stood solid. Now, riding through morning light that turned the Kansas grass to bronze, he counted 3 posts sawn clean through at the base. Not storm damage, not cattle. A saw had done this work deliberate and patient. He was 50 years old, and 15 of those years had been spent in the 7th Cavalry learning to read a landscape the way other men read newspapers. The signs here told a story he didn't like. 4 horses had passed through, 3 shod normally, 1 limping on its left rear. The tracks were 2 days old, maybe less. They'd come from town, cut through his land, and headed for the high ground to the north. Ben touched his heels to the mare's flanks and followed. The 2 posts rose from the ridgeline like a question mark against the pale sky. At first, from 300 yards out, Ben thought someone had set up a new property marker. Then the wind shifted, and he saw the rope. His stomach went cold. Not rope for cattle, not rope for hauling. This was manila hemp, 3/4 of an inch thick, the kind used for ship rigging or heavy towing, and it was tied to something that moved. Ben spurred the mare forward. The animal sensed his urgency and broke into a canter, hooves drumming against hard earth. As the distance closed, the shape between the posts resolved into clarity. A woman. Arms spread wide, wrists lashed to the left post. Ankles pulled apart, roped to the right. The position forced her body into an arc of tension, every muscle fighting gravity and restraint. Her dress hung in tatters, dark with road dust and sweat. Her hair, once pinned, now fell in matted strands across her face. Ben had seen men tied this way once, Confederate prisoners after Washita River. He'd helped cut them down and sworn he'd never forget the marks the rope left, deep grooves that took weeks to fade. He reined in hard 15 feet from the posts and dropped from the saddle. The woman's head lifted. Her eyes found him wide and glassy with exhaustion. Her lips moved, cracked and bleeding, forming a single word. "Don't." Ben raised his hands, palms out, and kept them where she could see. In the cavalry, you learned that hands told the truth before mouths ever did. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. His voice came out low and steady, the tone he'd used to calm spooked horses. "I'm here to get you down." She closed her eyes. A tremor ran through her shoulders. When she opened them again, her voice emerged thin and specific, each word weighted with meaning he understood too well. "Don't. It still hurts there." Ben stopped moving. Pain like that didn't announce itself unless movement made it worse. Pain like that lived in joints pulled past their limits and tendons, strained to breaking in ribs that couldn't expand properly for breath. He'd carried those pains himself years ago and knew their language. He studied her position with a scout's eye. Her left shoulder sat higher than the right, rotated inward at an unnatural angle. Subluxation, maybe 15 degrees off-center. Her breathing came shallow and quick, each inhale stopping short like it hit a wall halfway through. Ribs probably the 7th and 8th on the left side. "All right," Ben said quietly. "Tell me where." She swallowed. The motion made her wince. "Shoulder, left side when I breathe." Ben nodded once and moved closer, slow as sunrise. He drew his Bowie knife, 10 inches of steel he'd carried since the war. The blade caught the light, and her eyes tracked it, fear flaring bright before she controlled it. "I'm going to cut the ropes," he told her, "but I need to support you first. Otherwise the release will jerk your shoulder worse." She didn't nod, didn't speak, just watched him with the wariness of something that had learned to measure every gesture for threat. Ben examined the knots at her right wrist. His hand stilled, bowline on a bite. A sailor's knot, not a ranch hand's work. Double loop self tightening under load, designed to hold without slipping. Whoever tied this had training, military or maritime. He filed that detail away and positioned himself at her right side. The knife slid under the rope. He placed his left forearm beneath her wrist, taking the weight before he cut. "On 3, he said. 1, 2. The rope parted on 3. Ben caught her wrist as the tension released, easing it down instead of letting it drop. The shift in position made her gasp, but he'd spared her the sharp jerk that would have torn the damaged shoulder further. He worked the left wrist next, then moved to her ankles. Each cut came with the same care, the same measured support. When the last rope fell away, her body sagged all at once, knees buckling. Ben stepped in and caught her before she hit the ground. Not grabbing, not restraining. Just there, solid and steady, taking her weight where she needed it. Her breathing hitched sharp. She clutched at his shirt fingers, digging into the fabric like she'd drown without an anchor. Ben adjusted his hold, sliding one arm under her knees and the other supporting her back, careful to avoid pressure on her left ribs. "Easy now," he murmured. "I've got you." She was shaking. Part heat exhaustion, part shock, part the simple disbelief of being held without being hurt. Ben had seen that reaction before in the eyes of the Cheyenne women after Ouachita when the shooting stopped and they realized they were still breathing. Her legs wouldn't support her. He lowered her to sitting position against one of the posts, the same posts that had held her captive now offering the only solid thing in reach. Ben scanned the prairie, empty in all directions. No riders, no wagons, just grass and sky and the wind that never stopped moving across Kansas. But someone had done this. Someone had tied her here and left her to the sun. He looked down at her wrists, checking the rope burns. Deep grooves red and raw where the hemp had bitten into skin, and beneath those fresh marks, older bruises, 4 days old, maybe 5. Purple-green shadows in the unmistakable shape of fingers. This wasn't the first time someone had put hands on her. The woman's voice came again, smaller now. "They said nobody would cut me down. They said you don't do that here." Ben's jaw tightened. "What's your name?" She hesitated like names cost something. Then with a breath that trembled, she answered, "Claire Ashford." Ben knew that name. Not well. Not personally. But he'd heard it spoken in town 3 months back at the general store. A woman's voice calm as Sunday scripture saying that a town that only protects the powerful isn't a town, it's a trap. The room had gone quiet when she said it. The kind of quiet that happens when truth walks in uninvited. "Claire," Ben said gently, "can you stand if I help you?" She tried. Pain flashed across her face so fast it looked like anger. She made it halfway up before her left side stole her breath and her knees gave out again. Ben caught her. "That's all right. We're doing it slow. Don't take me to town." The words came immediate and desperate. "They'll just do it again. They'll make it worse." Ben looked toward the horizon where Dodge City sat like a stain on the clean line between earth and sky. He'd been avoiding that town for 3 years now, ever since Grace died, ever since he learned what silence cost. "I'm taking you to a doctor," he said. "Not because I trust the town. I don't. But because you don't get to die slow out here while they stay comfortable." Her eyes searched his face, looking for the trick she knew had to be there. Why would you?" Ben thought about Grace. Thought about the 3 days he'd told her to wait. Thought about finding her body in the Blue River with bruises on her throat that the sheriff called accidental. "Because I've been the one people didn't come for," he said, and his voice carried something old and worn. "And I'm tired of living in a place where that's normal." He lifted her again, careful, and practiced supporting her weight in a modified carry that kept pressure off her damaged ribs. As he moved toward his horse, the wind brought a smell that made his instincts flare. Cigar smoke, soap, town smell. A figure stood far off near the road watching, not close enough to be accused of involvement, not far enough to claim innocence. Ben didn't wave, didn't call out. He just kept moving and memorized the silhouette like a debt he'd settle later. Getting Claire onto the horse took patience. She couldn't grip with her left hand, and every motion pulled at injuries that made her breath catch. Ben mounted behind her, keeping one arm steady across her waist for support. They rode toward Dodge City, with the sun climbing higher and the grasshoppers singing their endless summer song. Claire kept her eyes forward, rigid in the saddle, like looking back would summon the posts again. Ben matched his breathing to hers, slow and steady. There were moments when talking felt like theft stealing air from someone who needed every bit of it just to survive. Still, she spoke once. Her voice carried bitterness sharp enough to cut. "You shouldn't have stopped." Ben kept his gaze forward. "I already did. They'll come for you. Let them." Claire let out a shaky breath that wanted to be a laugh but had forgotten how. "You don't understand. In Dodge City, pain is legal if it's done by the right hands." Ben's jaw flexed. "Then we put the wrong hands in daylight." The words hung between them for a long moment. Claire shifted slightly, testing her weight against his arm, finding it solid. "Who are you?" she asked. "Ben Garrett. I run a ranch north of town." "I know that name." She paused. "You had a sister." Ben's hands tightened on the reins. "Grace. She taught at the school before me. The children still talk about her." Something in Ben's chest pulled tight. Grace had loved those children, had believed that teaching them to read was teaching them to be free. "She died 3 years ago," Ben said. "I know. I'm sorry." The words were automatic, the kind people say because they don't know what else to offer. But Claire's voice carried a weight that suggested she understood what sorry meant when it came too late. As Dodge City grew larger on the horizon, Claire's body tensed like the very sight of it reached out to grab her. The town didn't look like a villain. That was the trick. It looked like a place where decent people lived decent lives, where church bells rang on Sunday and children played in the streets. But the men on the porches were already turning their heads. The women in doorways stepped back into shadow. The street quieted in that particular way it quiets when everyone knows something ugly has happened and nobody wants to be the one to say it out loud. Ben rode straight to Dr. Samuel Finch's office. Finch had been an army surgeon during the war, had sewn up more men than he could count, and had a reputation for one thing: he could be bought to keep his mouth shut, but he couldn't be bought to lie with his hands. He treated what needed treating. That mattered. The office sat on the east end of Main Street above the apothecary. Ben dismounted and lifted Claire down, supporting her weight as her feet found the ground. A young man in a deputy's badge stood near the hitching post. He couldn't have been more than 23, with a gun belt that looked too new and eyes that held too much uncertainty. "Mr. Garrett," the deputy said. His voice came out higher than he wanted it to. "Sheriff Blake wants to see you, privately." Ben studied the young man. Owen Harris. The town knew his story. Orphaned at 15, raised by charity, and odd jobs somehow scraped together enough for deputy training. Word was Richard Sterling had paid his tuition, though nobody said why. "Tell Blake I'll see him when I'm done here," Ben said. Owen's hand drifted toward his gun, then stopped. His fingers trembled slightly. "Sir, it's important." "So is this." Ben moved past him, half carrying Claire toward the stairs. Owen didn't try to stop them, and Ben marked that as significant. The boy was scared, not mean. There was a difference. Dr. Finch's waiting room smelled of carbolic acid and boiled cloth. The doctor himself appeared in the doorway, 58 years old, with hands that still moved with a surgeon's precision. His eyes took in Claire's condition in a single sweep, and his expression hardened. "Examination room, now." Ben helped Claire onto the table. She hissed when Finch touched her shoulder, and Ben stepped closer without thinking. Not hovering, just present. Finch worked in silence, checking range of motion, palpating ribs, examining the rope burns on her wrists and ankles. When he pressed gently on her left side, Claire's breath caught sharp, and tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. "Subluxation of the left shoulder," Finch said quietly. "2 ribs badly bruised, possibly cracked. Severe dehydration. Rope burns deep enough to risk infection." He paused, looking at Ben. "And older contusions on both wrists. 4 to 5 days old." Claire's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Can you fix it?" "The shoulder I can reset. The ribs need time. You'll wear a brace for 3 weeks and you won't lift anything heavier than a coffee cup." Finch's gaze moved to Ben. "Who did this?" Ben looked at Claire, giving her the choice. She closed her eyes, opened them. "Richard Sterling." The name landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Finch's hand paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing its work. "He'll need to be reported," Finch said carefully. "To who?" Claire's laugh was bitter. "Sheriff Blake works for him. Half the town depends on Sterling for employment. Who exactly do I report to?" Finch didn't answer. He finished wrapping her ribs, set her shoulder as gently as possible, and stepped back. "You're the fourth one," he said quietly. Ben's head came up. "Fourth." Finch moved to his desk and pulled out a small ledger from a locked drawer. Inside, in careful handwriting, were 4 entries. Margaret Cole, 1877, beaten and publicly humiliated for protesting Sterling's land acquisition methods. Left town 1 week later. Ellen Hayes, 1879, resisted Sterling's attempt to buy her deceased husband's property. Found tied to a fence post overnight. Died by her own hand 2 months later. Rebecca Lynn, 1880, wrote complaint letters to the county office. Tied in a field for 12 hours. Left town immediately upon release. Claire Ashford, 1881. "I keep records," Finch said. "Someone should remember." A woman appeared in the doorway behind Finch, older, perhaps 52, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that held the weight of old sorrows. Sarah Mills, the doctor's wife. She looked at Claire with an expression Ben recognized. Not pity, recognition. "I see the rope burns," Sarah said quietly, her gaze on Claire's wrists. Then she did something unexpected. She pulled back her own sleeves. Faded scars circled both her wrists. Years old, nearly invisible, but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. 8 years ago. Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Sterling wanted land my father left me. I refused to sell." She touched her scars unconsciously. "They found me tied to a fence post outside town, left me there overnight." Claire's eyes widened. "I'm number 0, Sarah said. "Before Margaret, before Ellen Hayes, before Rebecca, before you." She looked at her husband. "Samuel treated me. Never told anyone what really happened. We married 6 months later." Finch's expression was pained. "I couldn't prove who did it. No witnesses, no evidence, just rope burns and Sarah's word against Sterling's empire." Sarah turned to Claire. "I'm telling you this because you need to know something. You survived. That matters. And this time you're not alone." She pulled a small iron key from her pocket and pressed it into Claire's hand. "This opens the back door of the church," Sarah whispered. "If things get worse, if you need to hide, you use that." Claire closed her fingers around the key, holding it like a promise. "Why are you helping me?" Claire asked. Sarah's smile was sad but determined. "Because 8 years ago nobody helped me, and I've regretted my silence every day since." Ben stared at the names. Ellen Hayes. The name pulled at something in his memory, but he couldn't place it. "Why?" Ben asked. "Why does he do it?" "Control," Claire said. Her voice had steadied anger burning through the pain. "Sterling doesn't just want land. He wants everyone to know he can take it. The violence isn't a means to an end. It's the point." The door opened without warning. Owen Harris stood there looking more nervous than before. "Mr. Garrett, you need to step outside. Now." "I'm not done here." "Please, sir, he's coming." Ben understood before Owen finished the sentence. He moved to stand between the door and Claire, and when Richard Sterling walked into the examination room, Ben was already set like stone. Sterling was 52 years old and wore it well. His suit was Boston cut. His shoes shined to mirror brightness. His white shirt crisp despite the Kansas heat. He carried no gun because he didn't need one. Men like Sterling didn't do their own violence. "Captain Garrett," Sterling's voice was smooth as good whiskey. "It's been years. I heard you'd retired from the cavalry. The war ended 16 years ago, Sterling. You still fighting it?" Sterling smiled. "I'm building Garrett. There's a difference." His gaze shifted to Claire. "Miss Ashford, we've been so worried. You disappeared last night." Ben didn't move. "She didn't disappear. She was tied to fence posts like livestock." "That's a serious accusation." Sterling's tone never changed. "Do you have proof?" "Rope burns on her wrists." Witnesses who saw her on my property. Rope burns could come from many things. And your property. Sterling let the sentence hang. Well, unfortunate things happen on isolated ranches. Claire's voice cut through. You had Jacob Thorne tie me up. You told him to leave me there until I learned my place. Sterling turned to her with the patience of a man explaining simple mathematics to a slow child. Miss Ashford, you've been spreading dangerous rumors about legitimate business transactions. You've accused me of fraud without evidence. That's slander, and it's illegal. I have evidence, Claire said. Documents, records, proof of forged transfers and fraudulent claims. Where? Sterling's smile widened slightly. In your schoolhouse, I'm afraid there was a small fire last night. Kitchen area. Quite unfortunate. Ben felt Claire's shock like a physical blow. She'd hidden her evidence there, and Sterling had burned it. You son of a... Ben's hand on her shoulder stopped the words. Not restraining, just grounding. Sterling watched the exchange with amusement. Mr. Garrett, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Miss Ashford made accusations she can't prove. She faced consequences for those accusations. That's how civilization works. You really should stay out of it. She's under my protection now, Ben said quietly. Protection. Sterling laughed, genuinely amused. You're a rancher with 160 acres and debts you can barely service. I could take your land tomorrow through taxes, liens, or a dozen other perfectly legal methods. You have no power here. Maybe not, but I have something you don't. And what's that? Nothing left to lose. The temperature in the room dropped. Sterling's smile faded just slightly, the first crack in his polish. Don't be foolish, Garrett. You have a ranch, a life. You could still walk away from this and keep both. I walked away once. From my sister. I won't do it again. Sterling studied him for a long moment, reassessing. Then he shrugged the gesture dismissive. Very well. I tried to be reasonable. Remember that. He turned to leave and the door swung wide. A man stepped through travel dust on his coat authority and his posture. He held up a badge that caught the lamplight. Richard Sterling. Sterling's composure cracked for just a second. Who's asking? United States Marshal Thomas Wade. I've been investigating land fraud across county lines. You and I need to talk. Ben felt something shift in the room. Wade's name meant something. Federal authority. Jurisdiction that reached beyond Sterling's local influence. But Sterling recovered quickly. Of course, Marshal. I'm always happy to cooperate with law enforcement, though I'm not sure what this is about. Wade's expression stayed neutral. Miss Ashford wrote to my office 6 weeks ago, detailed allegations of systematic fraud and intimidation. 6 weeks. Claire had been planning this longer than anyone knew. Sterling's eyes cut to Claire, then back to Wade. Allegations are easy to make, Marshal. Evidence is harder. Which is why I'm here. To examine evidence. Wade looked at Claire. You mentioned documents in your letter. Where are they? Claire's voice trembled. Schoolhouse. Under the floorboard by the stove. In a tin box. Sterling's smile returned confident. Ah, that's unfortunate. The schoolhouse kitchen suffered fire damage last night. I doubt anything survived. Wade's expression didn't change. We'll see about that. I'll be conducting a thorough investigation. In the meantime, Mr. Sterling, I suggest you don't leave town. I have no intention of going anywhere, Marshal. Dodge City is my home. Sterling left Owen Harris trailing after him like a shadow. The room felt larger without him, but the air still carried the weight of threat. Wade turned to Ben. Garrett, good to see you. Ben blinked. You know me. We served together. Different companies, same regiment. Washita River. You pulled 3 men out of the creek under fire. Wade extended his hand. I was one of them. Ben shook it, memory clicking into place. Wade had been younger then, a lieutenant with more courage than sense. That was a long time ago, Ben said. Debt doesn't expire. Wade looked at Claire. Miss Ashford, are you willing to testify about what Sterling did? Yes. Even if it means staying in Dodge City facing him in court, Claire's jaw set. Especially then. Wade nodded once, respect in his eyes. Then he turned to Finch. "Doctor, I'll need a medical report. Detailed. For federal court." "You'll have it." As Wade made notes, Owen Harris reappeared in the doorway. This time his nervousness was gone, replaced by something else. Urgency. "Mr. Garrett, outside, please." Ben followed him to the street. Owen led him around the corner out of sight of the office windows and stopped. "There's something you need to know," Owen said. His voice was low, quick. "Sheriff Blake. He wants to meet you. Alone. Tonight." "I don't take meetings with Blake." "This is different." Owen pulled a folded note from his pocket. "He told me to give you this if you refused." Ben opened the note. Blake's handwriting quick and angular. "Meet me at the old mill. Midnight. Come alone. Trust no one else, not even the marshal. Your life depends on it." Ben looked at Owen. "Why are you helping me?" The young deputy's face colored. 3 years ago my mother was sick. Medicine cost $50 we didn't have. Someone left the money on our doorstep. No name, just the money." He met Ben's eyes. "Last week I found out it was you." Ben didn't remember it. He'd helped a lot of people quietly over the years, the way his father had taught him. Do good without announcing it. "That was a long time ago," Ben said. "Not to me." Owen straightened. "Blake's not what you think. There's more going on, but I can't say it here. Too many eyes." Ben tucked the note into his pocket. "Tell Blake I'll be there." Owen nodded and walked away quickly, like lingering would draw attention. Ben returned to the examination room. Claire was sitting up now, her shoulder braced her breathing easier. Wade was still making notes. "I need to take her somewhere safe," Ben said to Wade. "My ranch." Wade considered. "That might draw attention." "Everything's already drawing attention. At least at my place I can see who's coming." Claire looked at him. "You don't have to do this. You've already done more than anyone." "It's not about have to," Ben said. "It's about what I can live with." He helped her down from the table and out to his horse. The street was busier now, people watching without pretending not to. Ben ignored them all. As they rode north out of town, Claire spoke again. "Why did you really stop at the posts? You could have ridden past." Ben was quiet for a long time. The sun was lowering now, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. Finally he answered, "I had a sister, Grace. 3 years ago she came to my door. Her husband had been hurting her. She asked for help." Ben's throat worked. "I told her to go home and keep the peace, said I'd come talk to him in 3 days. What happened? She didn't live 3 days. They found her in the river, said it was an accident, but I saw the bruises on her throat." Claire didn't say she was sorry. The silence between them held more weight than words. "So when I saw you," Ben continued, "I couldn't do it twice, couldn't ride past and tell myself it wasn't my business. Not again." "You didn't kill your sister." "No, but I didn't save her either, and I have to live with knowing I could have." They reached the ranch as twilight deepened into full dark. Ben helped Claire inside, settled her in the bedroom, and gave her water and what food she could manage. Then he went back outside and stood on the porch looking south toward town. 11:30, half an hour until midnight. He checked his Colt revolver, made sure it was loaded, and saddled a fresh horse. Before mounting, he went back inside. Claire was still awake, sitting against the headboard. "Where are you going?" "Meeting someone. I'll be back before dawn. Be careful." Ben nodded and left. The old mill stood 3 miles west of town, abandoned since the new one was built closer to the railroad. Ben approached it the way he'd approach an enemy position, circling wide, checking for ambush. He arrived 15 minutes early and waited in the shadow of a cottonwood tree watching. At 5 minutes to midnight, a single rider appeared. Sheriff Blake Tanner, alone, as promised. He was 55, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that gave nothing away. Blake dismounted and looked around. "Garrett, you here?" Ben stepped out of shadow. "I'm here." Blake's hand stayed away from his gun, a deliberate gesture. "We need to talk. About Sterling. about what's really happening in this town." "I'm listening." Blake glanced around once more, then spoke quietly. "Everything you think you know about me is wrong. I don't work for Sterling. I work for Marshal Wade. Have for 3 years. Ben's hand drifted toward his gun. "That's convenient." "It's true. Wade needed someone inside Sterling's organization. Someone who could gather evidence without raising suspicion. That's me." Blake pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "This is Wade's authorization. Check the seal." Ben examined it. Federal letterhead. Wade's signature. Authentic as far as he could tell. "Why tell me now?" "Because things are moving faster than we planned. Claire's documents were in that schoolhouse. We needed those for court." Blake paused. "But there's something Sterling doesn't know. Claire gave me copies 2 weeks ago. I have them locked in a safe place." Ben felt the pieces shifting. "So you can still prosecute." "Yes, but Sterling's getting desperate. He knows Wade is here. He knows Claire's alive and talking. He's going to make a move." "What kind of move?" Blake met his eyes. "Tonight, he's sending men to your ranch to finish what the posts started." The words hit like a fist. "How many?" "I don't know. But you need to be ready. Wade can't stop it legally. Not yet. We don't have grounds for arrest until Sterling makes an overt move. This attack is that move. But you have to survive it first." Blake handed Ben a Winchester rifle, newer model than Ben's own. "Extra ammunition in the saddlebag. You're going to need it." Ben took the rifle, weighing its balance. "Why are you doing this?" "Really?" Blake's face hardened. 4 years ago, my wife witnessed a murder. Sterling's men. She was going to testify." His voice dropped. "Sterling didn't kill her. He had her committed to an asylum. She died there 6 months later. Doctors called it natural causes. I call it murder by another name." The pain in Blake's voice was real, raw. "I've been working to bring Sterling down ever since," Blake continued. "Slowly, carefully, building a case that can't be dismissed or bought off. You stumbled into the end game, Garrett. I'm sorry for that, but I'm also grateful, because Claire Ashford is the witness we needed, the one who won't back down. She shouldn't have to fight alone. She's not alone. She has you. She has Wade, and she has me, even if she doesn't know it yet." Blake mounted his horse. "Get back to your ranch. Fortify. They'll come between 2 and 4 in the morning. Human alertness is lowest then." "What about you?" "I have to go back to town. Pretend I know nothing. When the attack happens, I'll make sure there's a record. Federal witnesses. This ends tonight one way or another." Blake rode off, disappearing into darkness. Ben stood alone in the moonlight, thinking about Grace, about Claire, about all the people who'd needed help and hadn't gotten it in time. Not this time. He mounted his horse and rode hard for the ranch, the Winchester across his saddle, the weight of what was coming settling into his bones like winter cold. Behind him, Dodge City slept, but in the darkness men were gathering, and by morning everything would change. Ben reached the ranch at 1:15 in the morning. The house sat dark against the starlit prairie, and for a moment he let himself imagine that Blake was wrong, that no one would come, that the night would pass quiet. Then he saw Claire standing in the doorway, backlit by lamplight, and remembered that hoping for peace didn't make it arrive. He dismounted and carried the Winchester inside. Claire had changed into one of his old shirts, too large for her frame sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her left arm hung stiff in the sling Finch had fashioned. "You came back," she said. "Said I would. Most people don't keep their word." Ben set the rifle on the table and began checking his ammunition stores. "Then you've known the wrong people." He had 120 rounds of .44-40 for the Winchester, 60 rounds of .45 for his Colt, enough for a sustained fight if he made every shot count. If. Claire watched him work. "Blake told you they're coming." It wasn't a question. Ben nodded. "How many?" He didn't know, but enough to make it permanent. She moved to the window, careful of her ribs, and looked out at the darkness. "I should leave. Go somewhere else. This isn't your fight." "You leave, where do you go?" Next town, they'll find you. Sterling has reach." Ben finished his count and looked at her. "You stay here, at least I can see them coming." "And then what? You can't fight an army." "Don't need to fight an army. Just need to make it cost more than Sterling wants to pay." He crossed to a trunk in the corner and pulled out a box of tools. "And I need you to learn how to defend yourself." For the next hour, Ben taught Claire Ashford how to load and fire a Winchester Model 1873. The rifle held 15 rounds in its tubular magazine, each cartridge a .44-40 that could drop a man at 200 yards if the shot was true. "Breathe in," Ben instructed, guiding her right hand to the proper grip while being careful of her injured shoulder. "Exhale halfway. Hold. Squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. It's the difference between hitting and missing." Claire's hands shook at first. The weight of the gun, the reality of what it meant. But she learned quickly, intelligence overriding fear. "I've never shot anyone," she said quietly. "Good. Keep it that way as long as you can. But if they come through that door, you aim center mass, and you don't hesitate. Hesitation gets you killed." She nodded, absorbing the lesson without argument. Ben showed her the defensive modifications he'd made to the ranch over the past 3 years. The iron shutters on the windows salvaged from railroad scrap and mounted on hidden hinges. The trapdoor beneath the bedroom floor leading down to a root cellar with a tunnel that opened 50 yards from the house. The water barrel on the roof positioned to douse flames if someone tried to burn them out. "You built all this?" Claire asked. "After Grace died. Figured if trouble came again, I wouldn't be caught unprepared." "You've been expecting this." "Been expecting something." Ben checked the shutters one more time. "Out here you prepare for bad and hope for better. Hoping alone gets you buried." He positioned her in the bedroom with the Winchester and clear lines of sight to the rear approach. He took the main room with his Colt and a view of the front. Between them they could cover every angle. "We take turns watching," Ben said. 2 hours each. I'll take first shift. You sleep if you can." "I won't sleep." "Try anyway. You'll need your strength." But neither of them slept. They sat in the darkness listening to the night sounds of the prairie, crickets singing their endless song, coyotes calling from distant hills, the wind pushing against the house like something alive and restless. At 1 o'clock, the horses in the corral began to shift. Nervous movement's ears pricked forward. Ben rose from his chair and moved to the window without making a sound. 3 riders approached from the northwest, using the low ground to mask their approach. They moved slowly, professionally, keeping their silhouettes below the ridgeline. One of them rode a horse that favored its left rear leg. Jacob Thorne. Ben recognized the limp from the tracks he'd seen at the fence posts. Grace's husband, the man who'd choked the life from her and called it an accident. The rage that rose in Ben's chest was old and familiar, but he pushed it down. Anger made you stupid. Stupid got you killed. He moved to the bedroom door. Claire was already up, rifle ready. 3 riders, Ben said quietly. "Coming from the north. One's Jacob Thorne." Her face went pale. "Grace's husband." "Yeah. He'll recognize me." "Doesn't matter. He's here for both of us now." Ben checked his Colt one more time. "Remember what I taught you. Breathe. Aim. Fire. Don't think about who they are. Think about staying alive." The riders reached the fence line and stopped. Jacob dismounted and walked forward, his movements stiff from the old injury that gave him his limp. The other 2 stayed mounted, hands near their guns. Jacob's voice carried across the still air. "Garrett, send the woman out. This doesn't concern you." Ben didn't answer. Speaking gave away position, wasted energy. Let them wonder. One of the mounted men shifted his weight. "Maybe he ain't here. Maybe they ran." "Horse is in the corral," Jacob said. "He's here." They conferred in low voices, and Ben used the time to measure distances. 50 yards to effective range, 75 to the fence line where they stood now. The barn was 20 yards from the house, offering cover if they were smart enough to use it. One of the riders dismounted and started toward the barn, moving at an angle. The other pulled a bottle from his saddlebag. Even from this distance, Ben could smell the kerosene. They were going to burn him out. The man with the kerosene moved closer to the house, staying low. He reached the wall and began dousing the base of the wooden siding, working quickly. Ben waited until the man stood up to light a match. Then he opened the shutter and fired. The shot took the man in the shoulder, spinning him around. He screamed and dropped the kerosene bottle, which shattered and spread its contents across the ground. The match fell and caught, but the fire stayed small, controlled. The second mounted rider drew his gun and fired wildly at the house. Bullets punched through the wooden walls high and to the left. Poor aim, panic shooting. Ben tracked him calmly and fired again. This shot caught the man's thigh, dropping him from the saddle. He hit the ground hard and didn't get up. Jacob Thorne had taken cover behind the fence post, his revolver out. He fired 6 rounds at the house in rapid succession, each shot deliberate. One bullet came through the window Ben had just closed, shattering what remained of the glass. Ben moved to a different window, patient. He knew what came next. Jacob would have to reload. The moment Jacob's hands moved to his belt for fresh cartridges, Ben opened the second shutter and stepped onto the porch. Jacob. Thorne spun, fumbling with the bullets. His face was twisted with rage and fear in equal measure. "You killed my men," Jacob snarled. "I shot them. They're not dead. Yet." Ben's voice was level cold. "Leave now and they stay that way. Sterling wants the woman. Sterling can want all he likes. She's under my protection." Jacob laughed to sound like breaking glass. "Protection from you? You couldn't even protect your own sister." The words hit like bullets themselves, but Ben's hand stayed steady on his gun. "Grace came to me for help. I failed her. I know that. I live with it every day." "She was weak," Jacob spat. "Crying all the time, complaining. Couldn't handle being a proper wife. You choked her until she stopped breathing. She fell in the river, with bruises on her throat. I saw them, Jacob. I know what you did." Jacob's face contorted. "Yeah. And what did you do about it?" "Nothing. You let the sheriff call it an accident. You let me walk free because you were too scared to stand up." "You're right," Ben said quietly. "I was. I told myself I'd handle it later, that I needed time to think, that confronting you would make things worse." He took a step forward. "I was wrong, and Grace paid for my cowardice." "Then you owe me," Jacob screamed. "You owe me for not coming after me then. I don't owe you anything, but I owe Grace and Claire and every other person who needed someone to stand up and got silence instead." Jacob raised his half-loaded gun, hands shaking. "Don't," Ben said. "You can't stop me. Sterling isn't here. You are, and if you pull that trigger, I'll put you down before your finger clears the guard." They stood 20 feet apart, the space between them heavy with 3 years of rage and guilt and unfinished business. Jacob's shoulders sagged. He lowered the gun slightly. Then his eyes shifted, looking past Ben toward the house, and Ben knew. He dropped flat as the rifle shot cracked from the barn. The bullet passed through the space where his head had been so close he felt the air displacement. Ben rolled, came up firing. 3 shots toward the barn door. He heard a grunt, the sound of something heavy falling. When he looked back, Jacob was running for his horse, limping badly, leaving his wounded men behind. Ben could have shot him in the back. The old cavalry training made the calculation automatically. Fleeing enemy. Clear shot. Tactical advantage. He lowered his gun and let Jacob ride. Behind him, Claire appeared in the doorway, rifle raised. "Why did you let him go?" "Because I'm not a killer unless I have to be. And because he'll tell Sterling what happened here, that we fought back, that we're not afraid." "Aren't we?" Ben looked at her, terrified, but fear doesn't mean surrender. They checked the 2 wounded men. The one shot in the shoulder would live if he got medical attention. The one shot in the thigh had ephemeral graze bleeding, but not arterial. The man from the barn was unconscious, Ben's bullet having creased his skull hard enough to drop him without penetrating. Ben tied all 3 with rope from the barn, then dragged them away from the house. They'd live until morning, when he could send them to town. The damage assessment was grim. 12 bullet holes in the walls. 2 windows shattered. The kerosene fire had scorched the siding but not caught fully. The barn showed no structural damage. They'd survive. But Jacob would tell Sterling, and Sterling would send more next time. Claire helped Ben board up the broken windows, working one-handed. Neither spoke much. The adrenaline was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. As dawn broke, Ben found something in the dirt where Jacob had stood. A piece of paper folded and sealed. It must have fallen from Jacob's pocket during his retreat. Ben unfolded it and read, "Retrieve or eliminate. $500 each. R.S." Sterling's handwriting. Direct evidence of conspiracy to murder. Ben showed it to Claire. Her eyes widened. "This is proof," she breathed. "Direct proof he ordered it. It's something. Don't know if it's enough for court, but it's something." They were still examining the note when hoofbeats sounded from the south. Ben grabbed his rifle but relaxed when he recognized the rider. Owen Harris approached slowly, hands visible and empty. He looked younger in the morning light, exhausted and scared. "Mr. Garrett," Owen called. "Can I come in?" Ben studied him for a long moment. "You alone?" "Yes, sir, I swear it." "Then come ahead, but keep your hands where I can see them." Owen dismounted at the fence line and walked toward the house. His badge caught the early sunlight, but his gun belt was missing. "I'm not armed," Owen said. "I couldn't. Sheriff Blake said I should come here, talk to you." "Blake sent you." "Not exactly. He just said if I had to choose, I should choose what I could live with." Owen's voice cracked slightly. "Last night Sterling called me to his office. He ordered me to kill you. Said if I didn't, he'd foreclose on my mother's house. She's sick, Mr. Garrett, real sick. That house is all she has." Claire tensed beside Ben, but Ben raised a hand slightly, keeping her calm. "So, why are you here instead of shooting me?" Ben asked. Owen's face colored. "Because 3 years ago, when my mother needed medicine, we couldn't afford someone left $50 on our doorstep. No name, just the money." He met Ben's eyes. "I found out last week it was you." Ben barely remembered it. A widow and her sick son. He'd heard about it at the store, left money that night, never mentioned it again. "That was a long time ago," Ben said. "Not to me. You saved my mother's life. I can't repay that by taking yours." "What about your mother's house?" Owen's jaw set. "I'll find another way. Work extra. Borrow. Something. But I won't kill a good man for a bad one." Ben lowered the rifle completely. "You have gun skills." The question seemed to catch Owen off guard. "Some. Basic training. But I've never shot at a person." "Good. Keep it that way as long as you can." Ben gestured toward the house. "You want to help? Really help?" "Yes, sir." "Then you're going to learn how to defend people instead of intimidating them. How to use a gun to protect instead of threaten. You up for that?" Owen nodded, something like hope flickering in his young face. Over the next hours, Ben taught Owen Harris what 15 years in the cavalry had taught him: how to read terrain, how to establish defensive positions, how to maintain a weapon so it wouldn't fail when you needed it most. Owen learned quickly, soaking up knowledge like parched ground taking rain. He was smart and willing, 2 qualities that mattered more than natural talent. At midday, Claire brought them water and watched the lesson with an expression Ben couldn't quite read. "You're a good teacher," she said quietly. "I'm just a soldier who lived long enough to learn things worth passing on." "It's more than that. You care whether he learns, whether he survives." Ben looked at Owen, who was practicing sight alignment with the careful focus of someone who understood that details saved lives. "He reminds me of men I served with, young, uncertain, but with good hearts under the fear." Ben's voice softened. "Too many of them died because nobody taught them what they needed to know. If I can give this kid a better chance, I will." As the sun climbed toward its peak, Owen came over. "Mr. Garrett, I need to tell you something. Blake sent word this morning, through a courier I trust." "What did he say?" "Sterling's gathering men, more than last night. Blake counted 12 riders at the Sterling Ranch. They're coming tonight." Ben absorbed this. 12 men versus 3, one of them wounded, one inexperienced. The mathematics didn't favor survival. "Wade can't stop it," Claire asked. Owen shook his head. "Not legally. Sterling hasn't committed a crime Blake can prove. The attack last night, Jacob and his men can claim they were just riding by and you started shooting. Without direct evidence of Sterling's involvement, Wade's hands are tied." "We have the note," Claire said. "That helps, but it's not enough for an arrest warrant. Not yet." Owen's face was grim. "Blake says this is the end game. Sterling knows you have evidence. He knows Claire can testify. He's making one final push to eliminate both problems." Ben turned to look at his ranch, the barn he'd rebuilt after the fire 2 years ago, the house where he'd lived since leaving the cavalry, the land he'd worked until his hands were more callous than skin. He could abandon it, take Claire and Owen and run, find another town, another territory, another life. But running meant Sterling won, meant the next person who stood up to him would face the same thing, meant Grace and Ellen Hayes and Margaret Cole and Rebecca Lynn had suffered for nothing. "We fortify," Ben said. "We dig in, and we make them pay for every yard they take." They spent the afternoon preparing. Ben and Owen dug shallow trenches 50 yards from the house, deep enough to trip a running horse. They strung rope lines at chest height in 3 places, clothesline tactics that would knock riders from their saddles in the dark. They barricaded the doors with furniture heavy enough to stop bullets. They filled every container with water in case of fire. Claire worked, despite her injuries, loading magazines, organizing ammunition, preparing bandages in case someone was wounded. As twilight approached, Ben called them together. 12 men is too many to fight head-on," he said. "We can't win a straight fight. So we don't fight straight. We bleed them slow, make them pay for every advance, use the dark, use their numbers against them." He outlined the plan. Owen would cover the barn approach from the left window. Claire would watch the rear from the bedroom. Ben would take the front, the most likely attack vector. "Communication is 3 whistle blasts," Ben continued. "That means retreat to the house immediately, no arguments. We're not trying to be heroes, we're trying to survive." Owen checked his revolver for the 5th time. "What if we don't?" "Then we make sure Wade and Blake have enough evidence to finish what we started. Sterling doesn't get to win just because we're dead." As full dark settled over the prairie, Ben stood on the porch and looked south toward Dodge City. Somewhere in that town, 12 men were mounting horses, checking weapons, preparing to kill. He thought about Grace buried in the small plot behind the house, thought about all the times he'd stood at her grave and promised to do better. Tonight he'd keep that promise or die trying. Claire joined him on the porch. The sling was gone from her arm, though Ben knew her shoulder still ached. She'd chosen mobility over caution. "If we die tonight," she said quietly, "who tells our story? Wade, Blake, the people who come after." Ben looked at her. "But we're not dying tonight. We're fighting. There's a difference." At 10 o'clock they came. Not all at once, not loud and obvious. They came like professionals, splitting into 3 groups, using the terrain Ben had expected them to ignore. 4 riders approached from the front, staying spread out to avoid presenting a group target. 4 more circled toward the barn. 4 stayed back in reserve, ready to exploit any opening. Ben watched from the darkened window, tracking their movements by moonlight and the occasional glint of metal. They were better organized than Jacob's group. Someone with military experience was leading them. The first group reached the trench line. 2 horses stumbled, throwing their riders. The men cursed and scrambled up, disoriented but unhurt. Before they could regroup, Owen fired from the barn. A warning shot that kicked up dirt 10 feet in front of them. The message was clear. "We see you. We're ready." The riders retreated to cover, and Ben heard shouting, reorganizing. They'd expected easier prey. At 10:15, the barn group made their move. They came fast, pushing hard, trying to overwhelm Owen's position with speed, but they hit the rope line at full gallop. 3 men were swept from their saddles, hitting the ground hard. Their horses scattered. The 4th rider saw the trap and reined in, but Owen's next shot wasn't a warning. It took the man in the leg, dropping him from the saddle. Now they were down to 8 effectives, but 8 was still too many. The reserve group moved up, and Ben saw them passing something hand to hand, a bundle wrapped in cloth. His stomach went cold. Dynamite. "Get down!" he shouted. The explosion came 3 seconds later, not at the house but at the barn. The front wall blew inward fire and splinters erupting into the night. The horses in the corral screamed and bolted. Owen came running from the barn, his face bloody from flying debris. Ben opened the door and pulled him inside just as bullets started punching through the air where he'd been standing. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the sky, turning night into flickering day. The light gave the attackers better visibility, but also exposed their positions. Claire fired from the bedroom window, her shot careful and aimed. One of the advance men grabbed his shoulder and fell back. 7 effectives now. But the dynamics had shifted. The barn was gone. They'd lost their left flank coverage, and the attackers knew it. They pressed harder, moving in coordinated rushes using fire and maneuver tactics. Military training showing through. Ben fired methodically, making each shot count. He dropped one man with a leg shot, wounded another in the arm. But they kept coming, driven by Sterling's money and promises. At 10:45, another bundle sailed through the air. This one hit the front porch. Ben saw it, knew what it was, and had 2 seconds to make a decision. He threw himself out the door, grabbed the dynamite, and hurled it back toward the attackers. It exploded 15 feet from the house, the blast wave slamming him backward through the doorway. His ears rang. His vision swam. But he was alive. Claire was beside him, pulling him to his feet. Blood ran from a cut on her forehead where shrapnel had grazed her. Owen stood at the window, firing steadily, keeping the pressure up. The front wall had a hole in it now, large enough to crawl through. The door hung on one hinge. They couldn't hold this position much longer. "Retreat to the cellar," Ben gasped. "Now. We can still. Now." Claire and Owen went first, dropping through the trapdoor in the bedroom floor. Ben fired 3 more shots to keep heads down, then followed. The cellar was dark and cool, the tunnel beyond offering escape. But Ben had no intention of running. He grabbed a can of kerosene from the shelf, the same kind Sterling's men had tried to use on him. Then he climbed back up. The attackers were advancing on the house, 6 men moving in a line. They thought it was over, thought their prey was trapped or dead. Ben opened the broken door and stepped out, the kerosene can in one hand, a lit match in the other. "One more step and I burn this whole thing down," he shouted. With all Sterling's evidence inside, that stopped them. If the house burned, any documents Claire had hidden would burn too. Sterling wanted her dead, but he wanted the evidence destroyed more. The men hesitated, looking at each other, uncertain. And in that moment of hesitation, new voices cut through the night. "United States Marshal, drop your weapons." Thomas Wade emerged from the darkness, with 8 federal deputies, rifles raised. Sheriff Blake was with him, badge gleaming in the firelight. The attackers looked around, calculating odds. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and their advantage had evaporated. One by one they dropped their guns. But the man leading them, a hard-faced veteran with gray in his beard, made a different choice. He lunged forward and grabbed Claire as she emerged from the cellar, yanking her in front of him as a shield, his knife pressed against her throat. "Nobody moves," he shouted, "or she dies right here." Ben raised his gun, then slowly lowered it. His eyes met Claire's. She was terrified but trying to stay calm. "Let her go," Ben said quietly. "Take me instead." "You think I'm stupid?" The man backed toward the horses, dragging Claire with him. "She's my ticket out." Ben took a step forward, hands raised, gun pointed at the ground. "You're surrounded. You won't make it 10 yards. But if you let her go now, you walk away alive." "Ben, don't!" Claire gasped. Ben ignored her, focused on the man. "I'm giving you a choice most men don't get. Make the right one." For 5 long seconds nobody moved. Then Wade's voice cut through the darkness. "Federal Marshal, I have 12 rifles aimed at you. You hurt her, you die. You release her, you live. Simple math." The man's grip loosened slightly. He was calculating odds, realizing he'd lost. "On the ground," Wade commanded. "Knife first, then hands behind your head." The man hesitated 1 more second, then shoved Claire forward. She stumbled into Ben's arms. The man dropped his knife and went to his knees. 3 deputies rushed in and secured him. The fight was over. Wade's deputies moved in, securing the prisoners. Blake walked among them, taking names, checking faces. One of the captured men spoke up, trying to bargain. "We were just following orders. Sterling sent us. We got proof. He gave us letters, promised money." Wade pulled the letters from the man's pocket and read by firelight. Each one bore Sterling's signature. Each one detailed the attack plan and promised payment for eliminating the Garrett problem. "This is enough," Wade said quietly. "Direct conspiracy to commit murder. Written evidence. Multiple witnesses." He looked at Ben. "It's enough to arrest him." Ben sagged against the porch railing, exhaustion finally catching up. His barn was ashes, his house was damaged, his body ached from the blast and the fight. But they'd survived. Claire stood beside him, Owen on his other side. They were wounded, bloody, and exhausted, but they were alive. "What happens now?" Claire asked. Wade holstered his gun. "Now we ride to town. We arrest Richard Sterling. And we end this." Ben looked at the ruins of his barn, at the damaged house, at the bodies of men who'd tried to kill him on Sterling's orders. Then he looked at Claire and Owen, at the people who'd stood with him when standing meant risking everything. "No," he said quietly. Wade frowned. "What? We don't arrest Sterling in the middle of the night. We arrest him in daylight, in front of the whole town. We make sure everyone sees." Ben's voice hardened. "Sterling built his power on people looking the other way, on violence done in darkness where nobody has to witness it. We end that. We make it public. We make it unavoidable." Wade considered, then nodded slowly. "At dawn, then. We ride at dawn." The remaining hours before sunrise passed in a strange stillness. Wade's deputies guarded the prisoners. Blake tended wounds. Ben, Claire, and Owen sat on what remained of the porch and watched the barn burn down to embers. "I'm sorry about your barn," Claire said. "Barns can be rebuilt." Ben looked at her. "People can't." Owen was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice young and uncertain. "Mr. Garrett, what you did tonight, standing up to them, teaching me, protecting Miss Ashford." He paused. "That's what being a man means, isn't it? Not the fighting. The choosing." Ben thought about Grace, about the 3 days he'd told her to wait, about every moment since when he'd wondered if he could have chosen differently. "Being a man means doing what's right even when it costs you everything," he said. "Even when you're scared, even when you might lose. You do it anyway because some things matter more than safety." Claire leaned her head back against the post, careful of her shoulder. "My father used to say justice isn't something that happens to you. It's something you create." Smart man. He died trying to prove it, stood up to the wrong people in the wrong town. Her voice was quiet. "I used to think he was foolish, throwing his life away for principle. And now I think he'd be proud I didn't run when I had the chance." As the first gray light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, Wade assembled his men. 8 federal deputies, Blake, Ben, Claire, and Owen. Against Sterling's money and influence, it didn't seem like much. But they had evidence. They had witnesses. They had the law on their side. And they had the will to see it through. They mounted up and rode toward Dodge City as the sun broke free of the earth. The town was just waking, smoke rising from breakfast fires, shops beginning to open. They rode straight down Main Street, 12 riders in a line with the prisoners bound and walking behind. Every door opened, every window filled with faces. The whole town came out to watch. Wade led them to Sterling's bank building where the man kept his offices. They dismounted in formation, deputies spreading out to cover exits. Ben, Claire, and Owen stayed mounted, visible to everyone. Let the town see who'd stood up. Let them see who'd survived. Wade climbed the stairs to Sterling's office and knocked once. Then he kicked the door open. Richard Sterling sat behind his mahogany desk, dressed as impeccably as always, but his eyes held something new. Fear. "Richard Sterling," Wade said formally, You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, intimidation, and violations of federal law. You will be tried in federal court." Sterling stood slowly. "You have no proof." Wade dropped the letters on the desk. "Your handwriting, your signature, ordering the deaths of Ben Garrett and Claire Ashford, witnessed by 12 men who'll testify to save their own necks." Sterling's face went pale. He looked past Wade out the window to where the whole town watched, his empire crumbling in daylight exactly as Ben had wanted. "This isn't over," Sterling said quietly. Ben stepped into the doorway. "Yes, it is. Maybe not today, maybe not in a week, but it's over. Because people saw, they know, and they'll remember." Sterling's eyes found Ben's, and for a moment, genuine hatred blazed there. Then Wade's deputies took him by the arms and led him out into the morning sun, into the view of everyone who'd ever feared him. The town watched in silence as Richard Sterling was loaded into a wagon bound for the territorial prison until trial. Claire sat on her horse watching it all, and for the first time since Ben had cut her down from those posts, she smiled. The morning after Sterling's arrest, Ben Garrett stood in what remained of his barn and calculated the cost of standing up. The structure was a total loss. 14 years of work reduced to ash and twisted iron. The roof had collapsed inward, taking the loft where he'd stored hay for winter. The stalls where his horses had sheltered were blackened ruins, the tools he'd collected over a lifetime gone. Marshal Wade found him there, picking through the debris with a stick looking for anything salvageable. "Insurance?" Wade asked. Ben shook his head. "Ranchers don't carry insurance, can't afford it. Rebuilding cost $200, maybe more. Lumber's expensive, labor's scarce." Ben tossed the stick aside. "I've got $43 in savings." Wade was quiet for a moment. "Sterling has assets. Once he's convicted, there'll be restitution. That could take months, years maybe." Ben looked at the house, at the holes in the walls, the shattered windows. "I can patch the house enough to survive winter, but without the barn, I'll lose livestock come the first hard freeze. We could ask for emergency funds. From who federal government doesn't care about one rancher's barn?" Ben's voice was matter of fact, not bitter. He'd lived long enough to know that justice and compensation were different things. "I'll figure it out." Claire appeared around the corner of the house, moving more easily now despite her injuries. She'd spent the night in the main room while Owen took the porch. 3 people who'd survived something together, not quite sure how to be normal again. "Ben," she said, "there are people coming." He turned and saw them. A line of wagons approaching from town, 20 maybe more. As they drew closer, Ben recognized faces. Martha Green from the cafe, Samuel Potter who ran the feed store, the Hendersons who farmed 40 acres to the east, families he knew by sight but had never called friends. The wagons stopped at the fence line. Martha climbed down first, her gray hair pinned tight beneath a bonnet, her expression determined. "Mr. Garrett," she said formally, "we heard about what happened here, about what you did for Miss Ashford, about standing up to Sterling." Ben didn't know what to say. "I did what needed doing." "Yes, you did, while the rest of us looked away." Martha gestured to the wagons. "We brought lumber, nails, tools, and hands. We're going to help you rebuild. I can't afford to pay. We're not asking for payment. We're asking for a chance to make up for our silence." She looked past him at the ruined barn. "Sterling controlled this town because we let him, because we were too scared to stand together. You showed us what one person can do. Now let us show you what a community can do." Over the next hours, Dodge City descended on the Garrett Ranch. Men who'd never swung a hammer learned from those who had. Women organized food and water. Children cleared debris. By sunset, the barn's foundation was cleared and new posts were being set. Ben worked alongside them, accepting help he'd never asked for, learning that sometimes strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about letting others stand with you. Owen Harris proved surprisingly skilled with carpentry, his young hands quick and sure. He worked next to Ben, driving nails with steady rhythm. "My father was a builder," Owen said quietly. Before he died, he taught me. He taught you well. I wish he'd taught me other things too, like when to stand up, when to speak out. Owen's face was serious beyond his years. I've been thinking about what you said, about being a man, meaning choosing right even when it costs you. Having regrets. No, sir. Having clarity. Owen set another nail. I'm resigning from the sheriff's office. Ben paused mid-swing. Why? Because I took that job for the wrong reasons. Money, security, Sterling's approval. Owen met his eyes. I want to do it right. Learn proper law enforcement from Blake and Marshall Wade. Become the kind of lawman who protects people instead of powerful men. That's a hard road. So was last night. I'm still here. Ben nodded understanding. The boy was becoming a man and doing it through choice rather than circumstance. That mattered. As the sun set, the barn's frame stood outlined against the orange sky. Not finished, but begun. A structure rising from ashes, built by people who'd decided that silence had cost them enough. Wade approached Ben as the workers began packing up. We need to talk about the trial. It's scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Federal courthouse in Dodge. That fast? Sterling's trying to delay, but I pushed it through. The longer we wait, the more time he has to intimidate witnesses or destroy evidence. Wade pulled a small device from his coat pocket. I want to show you something. It was a cylinder of wax mounted on a mechanical apparatus Ben didn't recognize. Edison phonograph, Wade explained. New invention. Record sound on wax plays it back. What's that got to do with Sterling? Everything. See, Sterling's smart. Too smart to confess on paper if he can help it. But I've been studying him. He's proud. Vain. If he thinks he's won, he talks. Brags. Wade smiled grimly. I want to give him a chance to brag, on recording, in a way that can't be disputed in court. Ben understood immediately. You want to make him think he's beaten us? Exactly. Claire dies from her injuries. You give up, agree to sell your land. He comes to gloat. We record every word. He'll be suspicious. He will. But his pride is bigger than his caution. Always has been. Wade tucked the phonograph away. I need your permission. It means putting Claire in apparent danger again. It means lying to the whole town. Ben looked toward the house where Claire was helping Martha organize tomorrow's work schedule. She'd survived being tied to posts, survived an attack on the ranch, survived pain that would have broken most people. Ask her, Ben said. It's her choice. That evening, Wade laid out the plan. Claire would be moved to Dr. Finch's office, apparently dying from infection in her wounds. The word would spread. Sterling would hear. And when he came to confirm his victory, he'd find Ben waiting broken and defeated, ready to sell his land to make medical bills. I'll record the conversation, Wade said. Every admission, every threat, every word that proves conspiracy and intent. Claire listened without interruption. When Wade finished, she was quiet for a long moment. How dangerous is this? She asked. Very. If Sterling suspects he might kill Ben on the spot, claim self-defense. And if he doesn't suspect, then we get a confession that no jury can ignore. Sterling's conviction becomes certain instead of probable. Claire looked at Ben. What do you think? I think it's your life you'd be risking, your choice to make. That's not an answer. Ben chose his words carefully. I think we've come this far by being willing to pay the price for justice. I think Sterling needs to face consequences not just for us, but for everyone he's hurt. And I think recording his own words condemning him is the kind of justice that lasts. Claire nodded slowly. Then I'll do it. That night, as Claire rested, Ben sat alone in the main room. Wade had given him the documents recovered from the schoolhouse. Among them was a small diary, water-stained but readable. He opened it and saw the handwriting he'd known for 10 years. Ellen Garrett, his wife. The entries were brief but devastating. Dates when Sterling threatened her, descriptions of being followed, and finally 2 weeks before she died. RS came to the house today. Said if I testified about the land transfers, I witnessed Ben would lose everything. The ranch, his freedom, maybe his life. I can't let that happen. I can't be the reason Ben suffers. There's only one way to protect him. Ben's hands shook. Ellen hadn't died from illness. She'd died protecting him from a threat he never knew existed. Wade found him there an hour later, the diary open on the table. "You knew," Ben said quietly. "I suspected. That's why I needed this case airtight. For Ellen, for Grace, for all of them." The next day, Dr. Finch moved Claire to his examination room and spread word that her condition had worsened. Infection in the rope wounds, fever, delirium. She might not survive the night. The town responded with surprising grief. Women brought flowers, children drew pictures. People who'd looked away when she was tied to posts now mourned the possibility of losing her. Blake made sure the news reached Sterling's jail cell and waited. Sterling's lawyer appeared that afternoon demanding immediate bail. Judge Morton, newly appointed and immune to Sterling's influence, denied it. But Sterling was allowed visitors. Ben came that evening hat in hand, shoulders slumped in apparent defeat. The guard let him through after checking for weapons. Sterling sat in his cell reading a book, still dressed in his vest and polished shoes despite the circumstances. He looked up as Ben entered and smiled. "Garrett, come to gloat. Come to talk business." Sterling closed the book. "I'm listening." Ben pulled a chair over and sat heavily like a man carrying the weight of the world. "Claire's dying. Doc says infection's spread too far. She won't last the week." "Tragic." Sterling's voice held no sympathy. "She should have been more careful about the company she kept. And my ranch is destroyed. Barn's gone. House is barely standing. Even if I rebuild, I'll be in debt for years. That's what happens when you fight battles you can't win." Ben leaned forward, voice low. "I'm done fighting. I just want out. I'll sell you my land, 160 acres. You take it, I take the money and leave Kansas. No more trouble." Sterling's eyes gleamed with interest. "And why would I buy from you? In 6 months the bank will foreclose and I'll get it for nothing." "Because I have something you want. Claire's documents. The ones she didn't keep at the schoolhouse." That got Sterling's full attention. He stood and moved to the cell bars. "She told you about those before she got too sick to talk. Said if she died I should destroy them. But I'm thinking they're worth something. To the right buyer." "How much?" $500 for the land and the documents." Sterling laughed. "That's insulting. Your land's worth $2,000 at minimum." "Not with a burned barn and a murdered woman's ghost attached to it. 500 is generous and you know it." They negotiated for 10 minutes, Sterling driving the price up slightly to preserve the illusion that he hadn't already won. Finally, they settled on $600. "I'll have my lawyer draw up papers," Sterling said, "soon as I'm out of here." "When will that be?" 2 days, maybe 3. Wade's case is falling apart. No witnesses willing to testify. No evidence that'll hold up." Sterling's smile widened. "The men who attacked your ranch, they've all recanted. Said they were just riding by you, started shooting. Self-defense on their part." Ben kept his expression defeated. "So you'll walk free?" "Of course I will. I always do." Sterling leaned closer to the bar's voice, dropping to a confidential tone. "You want to know the secret, Garrett? Real power isn't about violence. It's about making violence unnecessary. I don't need to kill you. I just need you to believe I will. Then you do my work for me." "By selling and leaving." "Exactly. You spread the word about what happened here, about how standing up to Richard Sterling cost you everything. Other people hear that and they think twice before crossing me." Sterling's eyes were cold. "That school teacher thought she could expose me with her papers and her testimonies. But all she did was prove my point. Pain is the best teacher, and fear is the best law." Ben stood slowly. "I'll bring the documents when you get out. We'll make the trade." "One more thing." Sterling's voice stopped him at the door. "Those posts where I had her tied, you know why I chose that particular method?" Ben turned. "Because rope leaves marks," Sterling said. "Marks that last. Every time she looked at her wrists, she'd remember. Every time she tried to use her hands, she'd feel it. I wanted her to carry that with her forever. He smiled. That's real punishment. Not death. Living with the memory. Ben's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. She won't be living much longer. Pity. I would have enjoyed seeing those scars age. Ben left the jail and walked 3 blocks to the feed store where Wade waited in the back room with the phonograph. Did you get it? Ben asked. Wade rewound the wax cylinder and played it back. Sterling's voice emerged tinny but clear, every word preserved. The admission about the posts, the explanation of his methods, the casual cruelty in discussing Claire's suffering. That's enough, Wade said quietly. More than enough. Blake appeared in the doorway. Judge Morton is ready. We can present this tomorrow. But Ben had a different idea. No. We present it at trial, in open court. Let the whole town hear what Sterling really is. 2 weeks later, the courthouse was packed. Every seat filled, people standing against the walls, more outside listening through open windows. Dodge City had never seen a trial like this. Sterling sat at the defense table in a new suit, confident despite the evidence. His lawyer had spent days arguing that the letters from the prisoners were forged, that the attack on the ranch was self-defense, that Sterling was a victim of conspiracy. The prosecution called witnesses. The men who'd attacked the ranch now willing to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. Dr. Finch with his medical records, Blake with his years of documentation. But Sterling's lawyer dismantled each one. The attackers were criminals making deals. Finch was speculating. Blake's evidence was circumstantial. The jury looked uncertain. Then Wade stood. Your Honor, I have one final piece of evidence, a recording made using an Edison phonograph. It contains a confession from the defendant. Sterling's lawyer objected immediately. This so-called recording device is unproven technology. It can't be authenticated. I move to exclude it. Judge Morton considered. I'll allow it, but I reserve the right to strike it if authenticity can't be established. Wade set up the phonograph. The courtroom went silent. Sterling's voice filled the space, clear and undeniable. His explanation of how power works, his admission about the posts, his description of wanting Claire to carry the scars forever. The jury's faces changed as they listened. Shock, disgust, anger. When it finished, Sterling's lawyer stood. That could be anyone. Voice impersonation. Fakery. But Sterling made a mistake. He stood as well, outraged. That's not fake. That's my actual conversation with Garrett. He tricked me. The courtroom erupted. Sterling's lawyer tried to pull him down, but the damage was done. He'd authenticated the recording himself. Judge Morton gavelled for order. Mr. Sterling, you've just confirmed that this recording is genuine. Do you wish to change your plea? Sterling realized his error but couldn't take it back. His face went pale. The trial continued for 2 more days, but the outcome was decided. The jury deliberated for 40 minutes, guilty on all counts. Judge Morton sentenced him to 40 years in federal prison. Sterling was 52. He would die behind bars. As the deputies led him out, Sterling looked at Ben one last time. You think this changes anything? Men like me always come back. Claire stood from her seat in the gallery. Maybe, but people like us will be waiting. Jacob Thorne's trial was shorter. The evidence of Grace's murder came from 3 sources. Ellen Garrett's diary, which detailed Jacob's violence toward Grace, and Sterling's orders to intimidate anyone who witnessed it. Dr. Finch's original examination notes from Grace's body showing strangulation marks, and Jacob's own confession given in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He was sentenced to 25 years. Ben sat through that trial without expression. When it was over, Blake approached him. You didn't look satisfied, Blake observed. I'm not. Grace is still dead. No sentence changes that. But justice was served. Justice is just people deciding what price to charge for cruelty. It doesn't heal anything. Ben stood. But it stops the bleeding, and sometimes that's enough. 3 months after the trials, Dodge City held a town meeting. The purpose deciding what to do with Sterling's seized assets. The man had owned 13 properties in town, held mortgages on 47 farms, controlled the bank. His empire built on fraud and fear was now in federal receivership. Martha Green proposed using the assets to reimburse Sterling's victims, the families whose land he'd stolen, the women he'd terrorized, the businesses he'd destroyed. The vote was unanimous. Claire was appointed county land inspector, a new position created to prevent future fraud. Her first act was to review every land transfer Sterling had made in 10 years. 23 families received their property back. 47 mortgages were forgiven. The economic impact was immediate. Families who'd been struggling under debt suddenly had breathing room. Businesses could expand without fear of Sterling's retaliation. The town began to rebuild not just structures, but trust. Ben's ranch was one of the beneficiaries. The town voted to grant him $250 from Sterling's assets, enough to complete the barn and repair the house. He protested. Other people needed more. But Martha was firm. You put your life on the line when the rest of us were too scared. Accept the help the same way you gave it, with grace. The new barn rose faster than the old one had. Better built with improvements Ben had always wanted but couldn't afford. Owen worked on it every weekend, learning carpentry alongside law enforcement. You ever think about what you'll do when the barn's finished? Owen asked one Saturday. Same thing I did before. Raise cattle, fix fences, survive winters. That's all? Ben paused, considering the question seriously. I've been thinking about Grace, about how she loved teaching, about how she believed that helping one person could change a life. And I've been thinking maybe I could do the same, not teaching school, but teaching skills, ranching, survival, things young men need to know. Ben looked at Owen, things their fathers might have taught them if their fathers were still alive. Owen was quiet. Then, I'd like that, learning more from you. You're already learning plenty from Blake and Wade. Law enforcement, yes. But there's more to being a man than knowing how to arrest someone. You've taught me that. Over the following months, Ben's ranch became something more than just his livelihood. Young men started appearing on Saturday mornings. Orphans mostly, or sons of widows. Owen brought them, or Martha, or sometimes they just showed up, having heard there was a place where someone would teach them useful things. Ben taught them how to maintain equipment, how to read weather, how to deliver a calf and mend a fence and shoot straight. But more than that, he taught them about responsibility, about standing up when it mattered, about the difference between strength and cruelty. Claire visited often, usually bringing county business, but staying for coffee and conversation. Their relationship never became romantic, something deeper than that. Two people who'd survived trauma together and understood that healing didn't require coupling. You're building something here, she said one afternoon, watching Ben work with 3 young men on fixing a water pump. Just teaching what I know. It's more than that. You're giving them purpose, direction, father figures who won't abandon them. She smiled. You're creating the thing you wish you'd had when Grace needed you. Can't bring Grace back. No, but you can make sure her death meant something. Every boy you teach, every man you help become better, that's Grace's legacy continuing. A year after Sterling's conviction, Ben held a small ceremony at the ranch. He'd commissioned a memorial stone from a mason in Topeka. Simple granite polished smooth with words carved deep enough to last centuries. Grace Garrett, 1854 to 1878. She deserved better. We will do better. The dedication was attended by Blake, Wade, Owen, Claire, Martha, Dr. Finch, and dozens of townspeople who'd never known Grace, but came anyway. Ben stood before the stone and spoke without notes, his voice carrying across the quiet prairie. My sister died because I didn't act fast enough. I told her to wait 3 days for help. She didn't survive 3 days. I've lived with that guilt for years. He paused. But I learned something from Claire, from Owen, from all of you. Guilt only matters if it changes you, if it makes you better, stronger, more willing to stand up. He looked at the faces gathered around him, young and old, men and women, people who'd been silent and people who'd found their voices. Grace can't be saved. But because of her, because of what I learned from failing her, other people can be. Every time I teach a young man how to defend himself, that's grace. Every time Claire stops a fraudulent land deal, that's grace. Every time Owen protects someone weaker, that's grace. His voice roughened. She didn't get justice, but she got legacy, and maybe that's better. Claire stepped forward and placed flowers on the stone, then Owen. Then one by one every person there added something. Flowers, stones, small tokens. The memorial became a cairn of remembrance built by people who understood that preventing future harm mattered more than avenging past wrongs. 2 years after Sterling's imprisonment, Ben Garrett woke to the sound of hammering. He was 52 now, his hair more gray than brown, his hands thick with calluses from a lifetime of work. He dressed and went outside to find Owen Harris directing 3 young men in expanding the barn's northern wall. Owen was 25 now, a full deputy under Blake's command, but he still spent his free time at the ranch. "What's all this?" Ben asked. "New bunkhouse," Owen explained. "You've got 6 boys coming regularly now for training. They need a place to stay weekends, so we're building it. I didn't authorize this. Town council did, voted to fund it as part of the youth development program." Owen grinned. "You're official now. Garrett Ranch Training Center." Ben should have protested, should have said he was just a rancher, not a teacher. But looking at the young men working, learning, becoming better versions of themselves, he couldn't find the words. Claire arrived mid-morning with a wagon full of supplies. She was 30 now, county land inspector with a reputation for fairness that extended beyond Dodge City. Other counties had started consulting her on fraud prevention. "Brought lumber," she announced. "And news. Sterling died last week, heart attack in prison." Ben absorbed this without emotion. "How do you feel about that?" "Relief mostly. He can't hurt anyone else." She climbed down from the wagon. "But also empty. I thought I'd feel vindicated, triumphant. Instead, I just feel tired. That's normal. Revenge doesn't heal, it just ends the bleeding." They worked together that day, Claire helping despite her old injuries. Her shoulder still ached in cold weather. Her ribs had healed with slight misalignment. The rope scars on her wrists had faded, but never disappeared. "Does it still hurt there?" Ben asked the same question from years ago. Claire looked at her wrists. "Sometimes, when it rains, when I'm tired." She smiled. "But it's different now. The scars remind me I survived, that I fought back, that I didn't let him break me. That's good. Is it? Sometimes I wonder if I should have just left, gone to another town, avoided all this. Then Sterling would still be here, still hurting people, still taking land. And you'd still have your barn, your peace." Ben looked around at the ranch, at the young men learning to be better, at Owen becoming the lawman Blake had hoped for, at Claire who'd turned her trauma into purpose. "I don't want peace built on other people's suffering," he said. "I want peace earned by standing up. That's the kind that lasts." That evening, a young couple arrived at the ranch. Daniel Moss and his wife Sarah, barely 20 with 40 acres they didn't know how to work. "Mr. Garrett," Daniel's voice was uncertain, "we heard you teach people, about ranching, about surviving out here." "I do some teaching. Our parents died when I was young. We inherited land but no knowledge. We'll work hard. We just need someone to show us how." Ben saw himself in them, young, uncertain, needing guidance he'd never received. "Come Saturday mornings, 6 o'clock. Bring work gloves and a willingness to learn. I'll teach you what I know." "How much?" "Nothing. Someone taught me once. Now I teach you. Someday you'll teach someone else. That's the payment." After they left, Claire stood beside Ben on the porch. "You're building an army. I'm building a community, people who know how to stand up for each other. Same thing sometimes. They watched the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The land stretched endless, beautiful, and harsh in equal measure. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Claire asked. "Going somewhere easier?" Every day after Grace died, I thought about running, starting over where nobody knew my failure. What stopped you? The realization that geography doesn't heal guilt, only action does. Ben looked at the memorial stone visible from the porch. "I can't change the past, but I can change what comes next, and that's enough to stay for." Claire nodded understanding in her silence. A week later, Marshal Wade returned to Dodge City for a final visit before transferring to Montana. He'd been promoted, his success with the Sterling case earning recognition. He sat with Ben Blake and Owen at the cafe drinking coffee and sharing news. "You built something here," Wade told Ben, "something that'll last after we're all gone. Just taught some boys how to fix fences. You taught them how to be men, how to choose courage over comfort. That's not a small thing." Blake added, "Crime's down 40% since Sterling's arrest, not just because he's gone, because people aren't afraid to report problems anymore. They trust the law again." "That's your doing," Ben said. "You and Owen." "It's all our doing." Blake's expression was serious. "You showed us what one person could accomplish. That inspired Owen to become a real lawman. That inspired me to stop hiding my investigation and be public about justice. That inspired the whole town to stand up." Owen spoke quietly. "Before you, Mr. Garrett, I thought being a man meant being tough, not showing weakness, doing what I was told." He met Ben's eyes. "You taught me it meant making hard choices, protecting people weaker than yourself, standing up even when you're terrified." "I was terrified," Ben admitted. "Every moment of it." "I know. That's why it mattered. Courage without fear is just recklessness. Courage with fear is strength." They talked until evening, these men who'd fought together and won. Not through violence, though violence had come. Through persistence, through refusal to look away, through the simple radical act of caring about strangers. When Wade left, he shook Ben's hand. "You ever need anything, you send word. Federal marshals take care of their own." "I'm not a marshal." "You stood up when lawmen didn't. That makes you one of us." The years that followed were quiet ones. Ben's ranch prospered. The training program expanded. Young men came learned and went out into the world carrying lessons about integrity and courage. Owen Harris became sheriff when Blake retired. His first act was hiring 2 deputies, both young men Ben had trained. The cycle continued. Claire's land inspection program was adopted by 3 neighboring counties. The systematic fraud that had plagued Kansas ranching declined sharply. Property rights became reliable again. Martha Greene's Women's Association grew into a political force. They lobbied for domestic violence laws, for women's property rights, for protections that would have saved Grace and Ellen and Margaret and Rebecca. Change came slow, but it came. Ben was 55 when he stood at Grace's memorial on the anniversary of her death. He came every year, always alone, always at sunrise. "I did what I could, Grace," he said to the stone, "saved who I could save, taught what I could teach. It doesn't bring you back, but it means you didn't die for nothing." The wind answered, pushing across the prairie grass, making the same sound it had made for 10,000 years, eternal and indifferent and somehow comforting. He thought about Claire working in town to prevent the fraud that had enabled Sterling, about Owen protecting people instead of powerful men, about the dozens of young men who'd learned at this ranch that strength meant service, not dominance. Grace's legacy spreading like seeds on that endless wind. "I couldn't save you then," Ben said quietly, "but I can save others now, and I won't stop until I can't anymore." He stood there until the sun cleared the horizon, then walked back to the ranch where 3 young men waited for their morning lesson. Life continued. Work continued. The teaching continued. And in that continuation, in that refusal to let tragedy be the end of the story, was the only victory that mattered. Not revenge, not even justice, just the simple, stubborn insistence that tomorrow could be better than yesterday if someone was willing to make it so. Ben Garrett had become that someone, and Grace's name carved in stone stood watch over a prairie that was learning finally what it meant to protect its own.